The rain hadn't stopped for hours. The city lights shimmered against the wet asphalt like broken glass, and every car that passed left behind a trail of ghostly mist. Inside that blur of cold neon and drizzle, Ethan stood nervously under a flickering street lamp, clutching a small umbrella that had seen better days. His shoes were soaked, his palms sweaty, and his heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. Tonight was his first date with Claire, a woman far out of his league. At least, that's what everyone said. She was stunning, sophisticated, and confident. He was just Ethan, a mechanic who fixed cars all day, came home smelling like engine oil, and still lived in a tiny apartment above an auto shop. But for reasons he couldn't explain, she had said yes when he asked her out. Even smiled, as if she meant it. When she finally appeared, stepping out of a cab, wrapped in a beige coat and soft curls glistening from the rain, Ethan froze. She looked like a painting brought to life. "Sorry I'm late," she said with a laugh that cut through the cold air like sunlight. "Traffic's insane." Ethan swallowed hard, holding the umbrella over her as he replied, "You're right on time." And that's when the night began. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable night, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Exposed Tales for more stories that touch the heart and reveal the truths we often overlook. Ethan didn't take her to a fancy restaurant, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't afford to. His week's pay had barely covered the new shirt he was wearing and a small bouquet of daisies he'd picked up on his way. So instead, he brought her to Lou's Diner, a small, old-fashioned place on the edge of town where the smell of coffee and grilled cheese filled the air like comfort itself. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, the linoleum floor was cracked in places, and the red leather booths looked like they'd survived a war. But it was real, warm, human. When they walked in, a few heads turned. Claire's beauty lit up the dull diner like a candle in a dark room. Ethan caught the looks, some surprised, some mocking, but he ignored them. He wanted the night to be perfect in his own imperfect way. "Not what you expected, huh?" he said shyly as they sat down. Claire looked around, smiled softly, and said, "Actually, it's kind of nice." Feels honest. That word hit him. Honest. He'd spent his whole life being overlooked by people chasing glitter. But here she was, sitting across from him, smiling at the flicker of the neon sign outside. They talked for hours, about music, childhood memories, the smell of rain, and the things that scared them most. For the first time in years, Ethan forgot about money, status, or what people thought. He just existed, fully, completely, in that small corner booth with the woman whose laugh made everything else disappear. But the world has a cruel way of testing sincerity. Halfway through their meal, a group of well-dressed men and women walked in, one of them being Andrew, Claire's ex-boyfriend, a lawyer, the kind of man who wore arrogance like cologne. "Claire, wow," he said, approaching their table. "Didn't expect to see you here." His smirk widened when he looked at Ethan. "You slumming it tonight?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd dealt with people like Andrew his whole life, the kind who thought a suit made them superior. Claire straightened her shoulders. "I'm having dinner, Andrew. Please leave us alone." But he didn't. He pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, laughing with his friends. "You know, Claire, you always had a thing for charity cases." The diner grew quiet. Even the waitress froze mid-step. Ethan's knuckles turned white under the table, but before he could say anything, Claire spoke, her voice calm but sharp as glass. "You're right, Andrew. I do have a thing for people who know what kindness means. Something you clearly never learned." The color drained from Andrew's face. His friends shifted awkwardly, muttering excuses before leaving. Ethan sat there speechless, watching her with awe. She didn't just defend him, she saw him. But the night wasn't over. When it was time to pay, Ethan reached for his wallet, only to find his card missing. His stomach dropped. He remembered he'd left it in his work locker. Panic set in. I think I forgot my card," he stammered. "I'm so sorry, Claire, But before he could finish, Claire took his hand gently. "Hey, it's okay. Dinner's on me." He looked up, eyes wide. "No, I can't let you, Ethan," she said softly. "You've already given me the best night I've had in years. Let me buy the pie." She smiled, and suddenly the world felt lighter. They stayed until the diner closed, sharing a slice of cherry pie and laughing until their sides hurt. When they finally stepped out into the cool night air, the rain had stopped, and the clouds had parted just enough for the stars to peek through. Ethan walked her to her car. There was a long, quiet pause before she said, "You know, I was nervous tonight. I thought it'd be awkward, but it wasn't. It was perfect." And then she leaned in and kissed him, slow, tender, and real. In that moment, all the noise of the world faded away. But the story didn't end there. A week later, a photo of them at the diner went viral. Someone had taken it. Ethan and Claire sitting across from each other, hands barely touching, eyes locked in laughter. The caption read, "Love doesn't need luxury, just honesty." People shared it everywhere. It became a symbol of genuine connection in a world obsessed with appearances. Reporters showed up at Lou's diner. The owner, old man Lou himself, couldn't stop smiling. Business boomed, and Ethan, the quiet mechanic, found himself at the center of a story that inspired thousands. When someone asked Claire later why she went out with him, she said something that melted hearts across the internet. "Because he didn't try to impress me, he tried to know me." And that's rarer than gold. Months later, Ethan and Claire stood again outside Lou's diner. Only this time a new sign hung above the door, "Home of Honest Hearts." They'd bought the place together. Every night they served coffee, pie, and stories to anyone who walked in, proving that love doesn't start with fancy dinners or expensive gifts, but with two people brave enough to be real. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Exposed Tales, where every story reminds us that love, kindness, and truth still matter in this world. And as the neon lights of the diner glowed softly into the night, Ethan looked at Claire, her hand in his, and whispered the words that had started it all. "Thanks for saying yes." She smiled. "Always." And just like that, under the hum of the diner lights and the quiet rhythm of passing cars, love proved once again that it doesn't need a stage to be seen. Only two honest hearts willing to believe.